Hey everyone, welcome back to the Keep It Real podcast with your host, Nicholas Salter, man himself. So today I wanted to cover a topic very near and dear to me, to my heart. This is a topic where I feel like this is really where I wanted to get started with podcasting and why I kind of took this route in the first place, talking more about the masculinity crisis that we're experiencing right now in America, or really, I think the Western world in general, really. And just to kind of set the context here for what I'm talking about, I think it's become a lot more mainstream nowadays to talk about, which I am glad to a certain degree, but also, I've been talking about this shit for a while, so I mean, I feel like I kind of saw this coming, but unfortunately, a lot of the things dealing with masculinity got tied up in this thing called the red pill space, or a lot of the manosphere, which I don't think the red pill and manosphere are synonymous. These are two distinct categories. A lot of it's kind of internet speak, so if you're not terminally online, good. But just to preface here, red pill is a set of beliefs that a lot of men, really a lot of angry, bitter men, have kind of developed. Kind of has some basis in evolutionary psychology in terms of intersexual dynamics between men and women. But a lot of them have kind of taken the ball and run with it and have exaggerated perceptions of relationship between men and women to a degree to where they are allowing essentially kind of misogynistic. I know that word gets thrown around a lot, and I don't like throwing it around a lot myself, but in this case, a lot of it can be misogynistic, harmful content towards women in regards to trying to teach men how to be more emotionally controlling and abusive and manipulating and trying to court a woman basically because they feel like that's the only way that they can get it done because of nature, essentially, which is not true. Actually, going back to cognitive distortions, this is an example of black and white thinking, to where you think things have to work a certain way every like all the time, and no, that's not how the world works. And that's not how women work either. You just can't push a couple buttons and then get them to respond the way you want to. That's no human being can do that, or that's not how they respond. But as guys, especially as a guy that's kind of very cerebral and like to problem solve myself, I can understand the appeal of having a problem or an interpersonal problem and wanting to use just cold hard logic to solve it. However, because we're human beings, cold hard logic is not always the go-to solution for these problems. And in fact, I feel like in terms of relationships, they are hardly the solution to these problems. A lot of it just has to come down to expression and who you are as a person. At least that's what I've learned as I've gotten older. My stance on that could change. We'll see as time goes on. But basically, this stuff has been kind of propagating around for the last 10, 20 years, but I feel like it's not. But I feel like it was really now, especially post this last election, which I've kind of covered on a couple other different podcast episodes I've done before in the past, that when people were so shocked by the outcome of like Donald Trump and conservatives winning, it's like if you've been kind of having your pulse on the cultural zeitgeist and how kind of young men are nowadays, I kind of saw this coming. It's really one of those things where it's just like it's only those of whom that were completely surprised are the ones that are kind of disconnected from other spaces outside of their own echo chambers. But I feel like this is kind of clearly coming from out of the way, in my opinion. But just kind of to kind of go into it, this has been ramping up for a while, but now we've kind of gone to a degree to where enough has piled up under the rug that we're starting to trip over it. You know, we kept thinking that, we don't want to talk about masculinity because like we don't want to put women in a bad spot. A lot of people believe it's a zero-sum game, which again, it's not. There's enough pie for everyone, and the pie can grow over time. But a lot of people have the assumption that the elevation of women, or if we try to elevate men to a degree where women are elevated today, then it'll bring women back down, or it'll start reversing and regressing where we've been going towards. And someone could give an example of the overturning of Roe v. Wade, for example, of how we're starting to go in the reverse direction because of bitter men. Now, I kind of have a little bit of agreement with that, but the problem is that it's because we're not paying attention to the problem that's happening with young men is why they're starting becoming more extreme and more polarizing in a lot of these kind of conservative or radical viewpoints. I'm not saying being conservative is radical. I'm saying a lot more men are turning conservative, and the ones that are already conservative are probably turning a little bit more radically so. That's what I'm saying. I'm usually more independent, not to get into politics, but I feel like I'm more caring about the actual platform issues, and in terms of kind of where I'm leaning, I'm probably more like center left libertarian. But I'm like right there in between the edges of conservative and liberal. But that's neither here or there. Point being is that this has kind of been trending in this direction for a while, but now just kind of like on an exponential line graph, where we're at that point in the curve to where we're starting to see the difference in between where we were 10 years ago versus where we are now in terms of men and masculinity. So to kind of give some concrete evidence of what I'm talking about here, basically in terms of statistics, women graduate college at significantly higher rates than men in every state in U.S. nowadays, and I think within the next five or 10 years or so, it'll probably be double the admission rate for women compared to men. For mental health, the suicide rate for men is 4 times of that as women. For relationships, nearly half of male teens have never dated, which is double the rate of previous generations. And in terms of friendships, 30 years ago, a majority of young men had over 6 close male friends, and now today that number has dropped by half. And then including that, 15% of young men report having no close friends whatsoever, and that number is growing. Public perception: 25% of Americans believe that mostly negative views that people mostly have negative views of men or masculinity. Basically, mean that like a quarter of people think, or they have a perception that people think masculinity is bad. Then workforce participation: prime age men have been declining in labor force participation, with about half of those not working citing serious health conditions as a barrier. Also including mental health as well. So basically, a lot of men are checking out. They're not even getting their driver's license. They're not moving out of their parents' home. Not the fact that they even try to afford rent, there is an economic issue here at play as well, which Scott Galloway talks a lot about, to where how if men can't feel like they can really provide for themselves, and how can they kind of feel manly enough to kind of provide for a family, that kind of thing. So until we kind of help resolve some of the economic frustrations that we're dealing with, it's going to be really hard to kind of get masculinity back on track. But I have a counter argument to that, which I'll bring up a little bit later. But basically, there's statistics kind of backing this up, to where men have been struggling now for a while, and we're just starting to get to the point now to where it is not too controversial to talk about it. Like, it's still not great. Like, even talking about it, you have to give it a lot of caveats, to where it's like, well, still women, we still want them to do well. We're not trying to put women down, but we also notice that men are falling off. So we've done great leaps and bounds in terms of feminism and equal rights over these last 30 and 40 years, but now we need to bring that same energy to men to make sure that they don't fall off. Because what people don't understand is that the world is trying to maintain a balance, right? Kind of yin and yang, day and night, not to get too spiritual or esoteric, but whenever you have one sex of humanity being adversely affected, eventually that's going to affect the other side too. So we don't just want men to do well for the sake of men doing well. We don't also want men to do well because it also affects women, especially because women now are also having a hard time trying to find a compatible partner that's on their level. Because if women are steadily doing this, and men are steadily doing this, the gap between the two is widening. So there's less potential partners for women to choose from, and then men are feeling less and less worthy of being in relationships with. And then it creates frustration on both sides. So this is not just a man problem. This is part of shit I hate seeing online, to where women are like, oh, well, it's the part of the patriarchy that men are struggling, so men, you guys fix it. It's like, well, A, we're all human beings, so we try to help each other. B, if there was any other protected class, such as like any kind of race or LGBTQ community, anything else, if they had a 4 times higher suicidality rate compared to the other half of the general population, everyone would be paying attention to it. It would be news. But because it's affecting young men, it's not getting that much attention because it goes against what the mainstream narrative is now currently. And that's something that really gets under my skin, because if we do want to say we care about people, it means that we care about all people, not just the people that we like. Right? That's what it means to hold principles. Like, you don't just hold them whenever it's convenient. You hold them even in times of inconvenience. That's what makes those principles worthwhile. So if we want to say we want to have empathy and inclusion and diversity of thoughts and opinions in people, that includes young men, i.e. also myself. So that aside, basically what I want to talk about in today's episode is kind of giving that background context is, well, how do we really start addressing this problem in a productive way that, again, does not put women down, which is what the a lot of red pill and a lot of these other misogynistic spaces are trying to caveat to where we're trying to revert back to some level of traditionalism, which I do think there are some aspects of traditionalism that are based in evolutionary psychology that are useful. For example, men leading in a relationship. I think that's what women want. Gonna be honest. I think that men, we have a natural capacity of wanting to guide and protect and lead. That's just part of our natural makeup. So when we don't have the opportunity to do that, we start feeling very down and out about ourselves and very purposeless and aimless. Like masculinity is what we're built to be. So if we're not enacting that and embodying that and demonstrating that, then it's like we are a tool without a purpose, which is ironically, I think, how a lot of men are feeling nowadays, which I think that's, again, kind of go back to some of the causes, is that because we were trying to get women, we're trying to elevate the status of women, we started demonizing masculinity. But then when we start demonizing it, we basically start kind of rooting it out or getting it out of young men and people to where now they're not even in touch with their own masculinity. So without having any sort of like foundation for who they are, they don't know where to go. They don't know who to be. It's like they kind of lack a life purpose or a reason to move forward, right? There's nothing to fight for. So why am I here? Which is why a lot of young men kind of retreat to like, alcohol or video games or porn, or just like trying to sleep all day. It's like they don't know what to do, so they choose to do something that's dopamine rewarding. But then they don't move out. Like they don't see a reason to push forward. And that's what we kind of took away inadvertently when we were trying to elevate women, is that we also kind of took away what it meant to be a man. Combine that with technology and the outsourcing of like hard labor jobs to machines, as well as just more isolation and social isolation and less kind of community groups for men to kind of bond over and get to know each other, for groups of purpose to be built. So now you have purposeless combined with isolation. Perfect recipe for depression and anxiety and suicidality. That's the issue. So that's why, in my opinion, what we need to start cultivating more is a healthy era of bringing masculinity back to the table. And now here's also another confusing thing when we're talking about definitions, and this is part of why masculinity kind of went out the door these last 30 years. People are like, oh, what does it mean to be a man? Like it seems like it's a very exclusive term, which, yes, a lot of terms are exclusive because in order for terms to have validity or have any sort of meaning, they have to be exclusive. Otherwise, if they're all encompassing, then they lose their meaning for existing. If you can say chair for anything, as in a window is a chair, a person is a chair, air is a chair, it's like if chair can literally mean anything, then the word means nothing. So the word needs to be somewhat exclusionary in order for it to have a definition and have meaning. Masculinity works the same way. If we can't call everything masculinity or everything femininity in the hopes of trying not to offend anybody, because the problem with that is now it doesn't have a clear definition, so it's meaningless, it's purposeless. So that's why I'm going to try my best to kind of find masculinity somewhat here to a degree, which, again, human beings aren't concrete, so having a concrete definition for anything in regards to a expressive human experience is going to be somewhat, it's not going to be all-encompassing because it can't be, because it's ever-changing. But for what I think right now, for a useful definition of a man, is, or at least what masculinity is someone that's able to kind of take the lead and take initiative to enact their will upon the world in an effective manner, right? Which is somewhat general, but that's kind of the point. Masculinity in of itself is kind of more of a, not to get too spiritual and esoteric, but it's kind of more like a force of nature, Like water isn't necessarily good or evil, Neither is plant life, or neither is the sun, for example. The sun is just the sun, right? The sun is something that gives us life and provides and nourishes, but it can also incinerate us and blind us if we stare at it for too long as well. Solar flares can actually come out from the sun and wipe out all of our global communications, and we'll be stranded for 15, 20 years without technology. So it's like things in nature, like masculinity, has good sides and bad sides. They can be useful and harmful. Masculinity is the same way. There is positive masculinity and there is toxic masculinity. Both are masculinity, technically, but one is better for society than another. And so here is my theory of kind of what happened, which I touched upon in my Donald Trump podcast video. My theory of what's happening in regards to masculinity is that we are so starved for some kind of strong, firm masculine leadership as a society that we decide to opt for Donald Trump, who is an institution buster, essentially, because we've lost faith in our current institutions for either being too weak or being too ineffective or not serving the American people. So the American people, like, I'm not a Trump supporter, but I'm just putting it out there. So basically, people would rather go for someone that's willing to kind of rig and upset the entire system at the hope for change instead of going in a direction that they feel like no change will be made. Donald Trump, as much as I hate to say it, is kind of a masculine figure in regards to he knows how to enact power. He knows how to get things done, not for the betterment of people, really just for his own self-aggrandizement. But he definitely has will on the world. Like, he has a whole tower with his name, right? That is in essence a masculinity of being able to kind of put your stamp on the world and have an impact on it, and kind of to be a known presence. You know a presence of someone who's really on top of their shit, who's really on top of their game. When they walk into the room, like with a suit, with bravado and confidence, is like the whole vibe, the whole air of the room changes when someone who really knows who they are steps into it. Everyone knows a person like that in their life, to where it's like, that's a guy that when shit goes down, I want him to be in my corner. That's what masculinity is supposed to be, right? And that's what I feel like American people are lacking, is that sense of strong leadership. And because we're so starved for it, we're willing to even take the toxic version of that. This is kind of analogous to the Andrew Tate phenomenon, which for those of you that don't know, which congratulations, you don't know, great. Andrew Tate is an individual that's been kind of propagated a lot these last 4 or 5 years in regards to masculinity, basically saying a lot of controversial things in regards to masculinity that gains a lot of young men's attention because it is contrary to a mainstream narrative that's been pushed for the last few decades or so. He's intentionally instigative. That's his whole brand. That's what he's trying to do. He's trying to instigate people so get more attention, get more eyes on him, get more young men on him, so that way he can manipulate them for a profit and kind of go into his whole big business thing. I think he does kind of believe a lot of what he's saying. And even some of it I don't think is actually 100% bad. But the problem is all the stuff that's positive for positive for men, a lot of the stuff he also says is harmful for women. So it's like, and even stuff for men too, where he kind of says, suck it up and just keep moving forward. It's like, there's only so much a man can tolerate before he implodes, which is why I think the suicidality rate is so high. It's because we're not meant to just take a bunch of shit and stuff it down and pretend it doesn't exist. That kills us. Literally, our hypertension, like our blood pressure goes up and shortens our lifespan. That's what happens. I think a lot of men die early just because of stress and bottling up their emotions. It's not good for us. So Andrew Tate trying to pretend that we're some kind of robot that we can just keep taking damage and just bear the weight and just we have to suck it up. It's not good for the long term, and is causing a lot of mental health issues that we're seeing today. So I don't agree with everything he says. But in regards to the fact that, he does say, when a lot of people feel depression, you might feel depression because your life fucking sucks. If you're overweight, you're still living in your parents' house, you don't have financial means to provide for yourself, you don't really have much of a life purpose, don't really have a social circle or relationship or any kind of pure meaning or job or anything you're looking forward to in life when you're waking up, you're probably going to kill yourself because you're fucking miserable and you don't have much to show for in your life. I mean, not to be so crass, but that's what's happening. So it's like a lot of us can be perpetuating our own suffering by lack of action, which I do think for young men is happening to a certain degree, to where we just don't act. But then the follow-up question to that is, why are we not acting? And it's because a lot of men feel like, not to use a manosphere term, but the juice is not worth the squeeze, right? What's the point of me trying to bust my ass in a job that's not going to be enough to pay for my bills, just for a girl not to look at me because I'm unattractive or whatever fundamental belief I have about myself or how the world works or whatever. And it's like they have a self-defeating narrative, but because they've kind of been defeated in society to where they feel like that they're ineffective and purposeless. That's the problem. That's why I like Jordan Peterson so much. I say this all the time. People are like, oh my God, that guy. Yeah, I get it. He has a conservative slant, and I don't necessarily agree with what he has to do in terms of climate change or his political leanings. But in terms of young people and how we navigate our lives, I think he's spot on. Like, he's really strong in the area of psychology, which is where I found him on and where I really care about or have the most skin in the game with, and what he talks about is in psychology and what it means to lead a meaningful life. And his definition to lead a meaningful life is to adopt a life of responsibility, is to adopt a life of figuring out what you're good at, what you can give to the world, and give it to your best of ability. That's what it is. And I think that's a problem, is that like a lot of men don't know what they can give to the world. They don't know what they're good at. They don't even have a good sense of who they are. So without that, they don't know what they can give. So therefore, they don't give anything. So therefore, they look for hedonism, try to feel better about themselves, and leads to a mental health spiral downwards. There's a book called King, Warrior, Magician, Lover. I think I've covered it a couple times in like my podcast episodes or shorts. But I think this is a great book for a lot of young men. I recommend if you're a young man listening to this that you need to read this book. It's called King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, or at least learn about it online through some articles or whatever the case may be. But it talks about basically the 4 pillars of what masculinity is, which is, kingship, being able to dictate your life path and have a vision for yourself and, where you're going, and to be able to provide your own self and kind of meet your own needs, right? Warrior, being able to stand up for yourself, stand up for other people, being able to hold yourself to certain expectations, baseline minimums of what you're going to meet for your life in terms of what you want, what your finance looks like, being able to protect yourself in a physical sense, taking care of your body, working out, like the whole looking like a man or Arnold Schwarzenegger in his prime, which again you don't have to do that in order to be a man, but just saying like that the physical aspects about being a man that usually people associate with masculinity, that's the warrior archetype. Magician, this is the archetype of basically what your skill set is, what you're good at, right? What you can provide to the world, kind of what I was talking about before. This is the aspect of yourself of where you can kind of develop and mentor other young men once you are good at your own craft and your own specialty. This is like your own intelligence. This is your own artistic sense. This is your own, how you speak, how you lead. Like this is like kind of like the essence or what makes you unique as an individual, that magician type. And then the 4th one is lover. This is the important one, or at least in terms of this is the aspect or part of one of the 4 archetypes that really pushes back against toxic masculinity. More than likely, a man that is toxic is missing this one, or he's doubled down on the warrior and is missing the lover. This is the part to where you actually can able to develop good, close, intimate relationships with other people, also having a good, close, intimate relationship with yourself, as well as being able to enjoy the life or the kingdom that you've cultivated, right? And this is interesting because I listened to like an interview with Andrew Tate like a year or 2 ago, and he talked about how when he's having like a big old party with like all the girls and the yachts and all that other stuff, is that he can't even enjoy it because he's too busy on the laptop trying to work and grind and make money, because that's what you're supposed to do as a man, all that other stuff. But that to me kind of spoke a lot, is that he doesn't know peace. He's probably never known peace. He feels like in order to be good enough, he constantly has to be working, right? This is the downside of the patriarchy. This is the downside of a toxic masculinity, where it's like, I can never rest. I must always be working. There is no enjoyment of life until I'm dead. That's not good. That's how you make men self-destruct. And that's the aspect that I feel like is missing, is that he lacks compassion, not just for himself, but for other people, which is why he's able to manipulate and do his other heinous thing towards women, is because he doesn't really know love. He doesn't really love himself. And then it kind of came from his own toxic father and background and all that stuff. And I can always do like a separate Andrew Tate video in the future, but that's not really the focus of this one. But the point being is that because of his background, how he grew up, he's missing that development of the lover archetype, so therefore he doesn't have that for himself or other people, so he treats them terribly, right? Donald Trump's the same way. Double down on the warrior, on trying to win, trying to be dominant, get that first place, trying to please daddy, which, by the way, Andrew Tate also had a toxic dad as well, so makes sense. If you have a toxic father, you kind of grow up to be a toxic man. Shocker. Which is why having a positive masculine male role model is so important, because if you don't have that, chances are you're going to turn into a bully. That's just how it goes. And that's the problem with Donald Trump, is that he's a bully that cares about his own self-aggrandizement, because he doesn't really learn how to love other people, because he's so busy on trying to achieve at all else, because he's developed an unhealthy aspect of the warrior, of the king, like basically being a tyrant instead of being a generous, magnanimous king instead. He only cares about himself because he's only obsessed with his own self-protection. The lover archetype, gone, essentially. So, like a table, if one of the 4 legs is unstable, the whole table's going to wobble. All the archetypes kind of play onto each other. So if you don't have a strong vision for your life, your warrior doesn't have anything to fight for. You don't have anything to learn or craft or cultivate for with your magician. And then you're going to fucking hate yourself because you feel useless. So there goes the lover archetype. So it's like if you chances are, if you're a young man having a hard time in your life or a hard time in relationships with women or a hard time with your job or just like with motivation, it's probably because one of these four archetypes is adversely affected, and you need to figure out which one. And there's tests online to do this stuff, but I feel like internally you kind of have a good sense of where you're struggling the most. It's these four archetypes right here that if you can kind of get them into more harmonious balance, you can feel a lot better about yourself and your life, and other people are going to be able to pick up on that vibe that you have now. I think just for me personally, even like my own archetype, I feel like I'm very strong in the magician archetype, like my mind and my intellect and figuring out problems and stuff like that. Great, awesome. I think kingship, I think I have a general direction of who I am and like where I want my life to go in. I think that's pretty good. But I think my two I struggle with most, ironically enough, are the warrior and lover archetype. But not in the way of Donald Trump and Andrew Tate, but probably more on the flip side of that, to where I think growing up, a lot of times I was a little bit more of a doormat and didn't know how to set boundaries and know how to speak my mind and stuff like that with people. Or at least I was like that when I first started out when I was really little. And then around middle school to high school, I kind of gave that up. And then in college, I realized I gave it up. And now I've been on that journey of trying to reincorporate that more assertive side back into myself. But I think that was been weak, and because of that, my lover archetype's been weak, and that's been making me and my relationship with women just, yeah, that's a whole podcast episode in and of itself. But essentially, I think that that's been adversely affected in my own life personally, but I also think that that's happening for a lot of young men because of the kind of culture that we're growing up in nowadays, to where it doesn't really teach what positive masculinity is. It just teaches what toxic masculinity is and teaches you how not to be that. But really, because we're not defining what positive masculinity is, we're just defining negative masculinity or toxic masculinity and teaching people how not to be that. We just teach people how not to be men altogether. So now they have no purpose, no reasoning, no guidance. They don't know what they're supposed to do, so they do nothing. They're waiting on a masculine man to come by and show them how to be a man and tell them what to do and tell them how to move their lives forward in a productive manner. That's why Jordan Peterson has millions of listeners, most of them young men, because they're looking for basically a daddy to tell them what to do to a certain extent, which is a really oversimplification. But essentially they're waiting on masculine guidance. That's why people vote. That's why they go for Andrew Tate. That's why they voted for Trump. They're looking for masculine guidance because they feel an inherent lack of masculine presence in the world. That's why everyone's fucking depressed, because without a guidance, there's all this emotional energy, right? But no outlet. There's no guardrails. There's no boundaries to direct that energy towards something productive. So it's all just a storm that's just kind of tearing itself apart. It's an emotional temper tantrum. That's what I mean, especially with like Luigi with the CEO shooting. I think it's the same deal. It's like to where you have all this negative energy as a young man about how you want the world to be, and it's not that way. And instead of channeling that into healthy, productive ways that can move the world forward, you decide to kill a guy. Not great. That's a problem. But that's exactly what that looks like, is that masculine energy is always going to be there, right? But if it's not channeled into something productive, it's going to turn into something deconstructive. That's where school shooters come from. It's not the captain of the football team that's shooting up people. No, it's always the guy that's at the bottom of the social totem pole that can't socialize, that doesn't know how to talk to people, that's very isolated, that's very they feel weak and ineffective and walk over. Those are the guys that get up so much resentment and bitterness in their life that it has to have an outlet somewhere. The shadow self, I talked about that in the last podcast episode, right? All that negative energy, all that shadow has to go somewhere, and it releases itself into just this emotional whirlpool of destruction, which on a good day looks like a classic nice guy rage out that you see on those r/night guys Reddit posts, to where they do a whole 10 paragraph long page about how a woman's a bitch because she rejected him, or whatever the case may be. It leads to that, best case scenario. Worst case scenario, it leads to a lot of innocent dead people. That's what happens. If masculinity is not channeled effectively, we're basically creating like an army of assholes, which is where you think all this lack of empathy, increase in conservative traditional tendencies are coming up. This is where it's coming from. Young men are kind of tired of being pushed around in society and being treated like second-class citizens, to where they're just starting to be like, okay, well, you're going to call me a monster. And this is what I have a problem with in regards to like the liberal woke agendas, stuff like that, is that if all your power is to shame and label people, people start getting comfortable with the labeling and the shame. Now being called a misogynist, being called a racist, or being called like a Nazi, all this other stuff, it's starting to lose its power over people to where like, yeah, I'll take the label. Sure, I am misogynist. Oh yeah, sure, I am a racist. They're saying I don't give a shit about the label because I just want to be effective in my own life. Essentially, shaming only works so far. That negative reinforcement only works so far until we get something positive to help reinforce it. To where it's like, hey, as a young man, instead of you going behind the keyboard complaining about how you can't get a date, better idea. Take your time, make sure you're eating well, you're working right, you got your finances in order, that you're volunteering your time somewhere if you're not doing anything else much, or that you have some kind of vision. Like you don't have to work at fucking Raytheon or something, but at the same time, have a vision in life of where you want to go and who you want to be, and take the time out of yourself to kind of meditate, read different books, read different philosophies, pick up things on Stoicism, which again, a lot of people misunderstand Stoicism, thinking like Stoicism is just shutting down your emotions. No, Stoicism is not just shutting down your emotions. Stoicism is putting your focus on things in life that you can control. It's not about becoming a robot. It's about becoming focusing your internal locus of control, so that way you don't become a victim in your own life. That's the big part of Stoicism. It's not about being a robot that closes off from people in society, is fucking Sigma grind set bullshit. No, it's about just learning how to focus on what you have control over. So you can't control the economy, you can't necessarily control how other people treat you, but you can control where you decide to spend your time. So if you got a group of friends that always pick on you or stuff like that, or don't do anything productive with their lives, find a new group of friends or just take yourself out of that environment, right? If you have a job or a boss that mistreats you, quit that job, find something else, work in a grocery store for a little bit, work a few part-time jobs if you have to, so you have some income coming in, but be working towards a certificate or a degree or something that can put yourself in a better economic position to give you the life that you want and meet your financial needs. It's like that's part of that kingship, right? That's part of the 4 masculine archetypes, that king of being able to have a plan for yourself. And even if the plan changes over time, or your goals change, or you fail, that's okay. It doesn't mean you're a failure. It just means you failed. You can learn from your mistakes and then choose a more productive path, or choose a better way to move forward from that. It's like that's that element of like there's not someone to talk to a young man and be like, hey, I know you're struggling right now. It's okay. In fact, if you're young or around in your late teens, early 20s, even mid 20s, you're supposed to be struggling. I think that's a big thing that we don't touch on in society right now. It's like a lot of people talk about the midlife crisis. Fuck that shit. I think only about 25% of people experience a midlife crisis nowadays. Now, 75% of people actually experience what's called a quarter life crisis. Because what happens is, and I talked about this in my own therapy, is that we navigate through what's called a life script that's been given to us since we were little, imposed on us by our caretakers or our parents or whoever, so to speak, and that if we do not take the time to really sit back and reflect about who we are, what our values are, what we want of our own lives, we'll follow that life script until we get everything that we're supposed to have, and then we'll end up really fucking depressed and miserable because we didn't take the time to really anticipate who am I, and what do I really want as a person. You've been following someone else laid down the train tracks for you, and you've just been on this train following the tracks, and you wonder, why do I feel good about myself? It's because, well, you didn't really create a path for yourself. You just followed someone else's own path. You haven't really been your own person yet. And what the quarter life crisis is, your realization of that fact, where it's like, oh, me going to work for a 9 to 5 every day and just eating the same meals and doing the same activities over and over again. This shit, is this all my life is? Does this life have any meaning? Am I just gonna be fucking autopilot for the next 60 years? What the fuck? That's a quarter life crisis, which most people are experiencing, and you're supposed to experience that because this is where the true process of individuation comes through. This is where you're really supposed to learn, okay, this is what I don't like about my life. This is what I do like about my life. Let's see where I can trim the fats on the things I don't like and focus more time on the things that I do like. How can I pivot my job to be more towards this? What kind of personality tests, or what kind of self-exploration, what kind of books, what kind of things can I do to learn and read about myself, read about my childhood, maybe my childhood trauma, go talk to a therapist and start really ironing out who I am, so I can start moving forward in a productive manner. This is part of that kingship, right? Creating a good path and lead for yourself, which I argue, I think the king archetype is probably the most important out of the 4, because the other 3 stem from what the king does and what it puts its intention towards, what it wants to accomplish. Because then the other 3 archetypes motivate itself and move itself towards the king's direction and what it wants. And a lot of men don't have a king, because a king has to be cultivated by an older man that you kind of admire. Not necessarily, I don't want to say idolize, because you idolize someone, they can let you down, right? But look at the traits of a man that you really admire in your life, or the kind of life that they have, and learn from them what they did to get there. Now, we live in a different context with a different time. You probably won't end up working at the same job for 50 years and be able to afford like a house and 15 kids and all this other shit. It's like time to change, so you probably won't be able to follow verbatim what that man did, but at least pick up on the traits of character that he had to have in order to obtain the things that you want, right? Finding a mentor, essentially. That's a big part, right, of kind of being a man, or kind of getting better at any kind of craft, is finding someone that's kind of done it before and learn from them, learn from their mistakes, learn from what they can teach you, apply that to your own life, to how it's applicable to who you are as a person, and then move forward. Trial and error. Things go wrong, try again. This time a little bit smarter, right? So I think this is more the messaging I feel like young men, they're hungering for, they're paying, they're literally dying to hear on a daily basis, because no one is telling them you are struggling right now and you are supposed to be struggling, but you can resolve it and you can get out of it. You can become the man that you're destined to be, to do great things. Doesn't necessarily have to be fucking president of the United States, or fucking be like Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos. Like, you don't have to be like the richest man, but you can just be a man of purpose for things that you find meaningful in your life, that your gift to the world that you can provide. That's what a man's focus should be. It's figuring out who are you and what can you provide to the world of value, because then the world will give value back to you. That's why surgeons get paid a fuck ton of money. It's because they basically save lives. They get the value of being able to save lives, or stop people from coming from excessive, unlivable, unimaginable pain, to bring them back to life, right? And they get paid a lot of money for doing so, because it's a lot harder than flipping a burger at McDonald's. It just is. That's why I don't get paid a lot for being a fry cook, because most people can probably flip a fucking burger. A lot of people can't do open heart surgery. That's why you get paid based on the value that you give to society. So chances are, if you feel like you have a really bad life, take a look at what you're giving. If you're not giving a lot, that's probably why you're not getting a lot. So kind of put that into a frame of reference. And this is not a whole like beat down men should be better video. The problem is, we were taught in school how to follow instructions. We weren't taught how to lead ourselves. So because we weren't taught how to lead ourselves, a lot of people are aimless, kind of grown-ass babies right now. That's how it goes. There's no masculinity that told a person, hey, I need you to grow up and take responsibility for your life. And I'm not doing this because as a punishment. I'm doing this because I know what you're capable of. I know the best in you, and this is the best path for you to take, for the kind of person that I know that you want to be. A lot of guys don't have someone to kind of sit down with them and have that man to son, that father to son talk with them, saying it's time for you to get your shit together, but I know you can do it. I kind of had that. That was my Corps Cadets experience back at A&M. That was exactly that. Like those 4 years of me getting my shit kicked in, it sucked, but it's what I needed for me to figure out. I need to take my life seriously, take my life to my own hands in order for me to progress as a man and be who I want to be. If I don't do that, I'm going to end up being a kid, being a baby for the rest of my life, and being a very resentful person. Because if all you do is follow someone else's life path for you, you're going to resent them and resent yourself for giving your life over to them. It's not their job to take care of you. It's your job to take care of you, and you can do the best job at it. So, I think that's really the point of where I wanted to say, where I feel like a lot of young men are coming from, or even just young people in general, like women too. It's like I feel like a lot of people are kind of waiting on being told what to do with their lives, and a lot of people have ideas on what you should do with your life. Doesn't mean you should listen to them, especially because their ideas might benefit them more than benefit you. So no one can really tell you who you are. That's something you have to kind of iron out for yourself, and it's not going to be a straight shot journey. There's going to be a lot of ups and downs. There's going to be a lot of mistakes made along the way. But just because you make a mistake does not mean you are a mistake. Just because you lose does not mean you're a loser. Just because you fail does not mean you're a failure. Right? Going through a quarter-life crisis right now does not necessarily mean you did anything wrong. It's just the nature of society. That's how most of us are going to end up, is going through this kind of gray area of experience of not knowing who we are, or what we're supposed to do, or where we're supposed to go. But it's up to us, even though it's not our fault, it is our responsibility to take the lead in our own lives and lead ourselves to a better path of one we care about, and giving our gift to the world the best way that we see fit. And in doing so, the world will give value back to you. That's where I learned from Jordan Peterson. That's where I learned from my own positive, like masculine role models like my dad, and that's where I learned that other men were lacking in terms of Donald Trump and Andrew Tate in terms of the masculine archetypes and being able to give value back to other people. Right, is that our strength as a man it's not for ourselves. Our strength as a man is for the sake of protecting and guiding and leading the ones that we care about. Our strength is not for our own, it's for the sake of others, right? That's why we're strong. That's why we have that strong masculine character, that strong body, that strong presence or aura. It's for love, right? It's for the love of other people, the love of the world, the love of society, the love of our loved ones. We fight for them, right? And for extension, for ourselves too. So I think that's really the bulk I wanted to cover. Didn't want to belabor the point too much, but I think young men, we're trying to wait on someone to save us. There may not be, and the people that are trying to save us right now, like Donald Trump and Andrew Tate, they're just here really just to serve themselves. I think there are good masculine role models. Like I think Keanu Reeves, for example. I think he's phenomenal actor, phenomenal man. He's been through a lot of tragedy in his life, but he's still magnanimous. He knows how to fucking shoot guns and kill people. Like he's definitely he's a badass. He's awesome, but he's also a very humble person. So I think the best thing for a man to do is to find good masculine role models in their life, or in some books, or just somewhere that they can start looking at traits of these men and start adopting these traits and kind of start integrating them into their own life. And then on top of that, learning what their gift is and what they can learn how to give to the world and other people, so the world can start giving value back to them. So they stop being in a victim mentality and start being in a mentality of accountability and responsibility, to where they can start taking care of themselves. And then when they start doing that, they can start taking care of other people. And now other people will want to start taking care of you. They want to start spending time with you. They want to start going out with you, right? They want to start hiring or promoting you because you give a lot of value, right? This is what it means to be a high value man. It's not about seeing what you can take from people, but it's about seeing what you can give to people. But yeah, I think that's more the gist of what I wanted to say. Like always, these episodes are always fun. Some of these are controversial topics, I know, but I feel like that's why they need to be talked about, because it's the fact that they're not talked about is how we got here in the first place. But yeah, let me know what you think. If you guys have any questions or any comments, always hit me up in that comment section.